Welcome to the World Forest Report. This is Dean Val and Dean Kevin reporting on the situation on the ground here on Earth with the forest fires and chemtrails, directed energy weapons, geoengineering and the weather, everything that's going on here in that respect. I'm going to play some more of the dimming, which is a documentary put out by Dane Wigington of geoengineering.watch. We played the first 20 minutes last week. I'll play another 20 minutes here today and see what we have here.
Is the stuff in the stratosphere going to be killing some number of people that are going to be sacrificed?
It's an obvious concern.
So if it kills 1 million people and we're only doing 1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
Okay.
But that's, so killing people is not the objective here.
So if I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense, would put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision.
And so the only thing that we can do to cool the planet, or that society can do to cool the planet, is deploy these sorts of technologies.
And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard. It's more like free riding on our grandkids.
And it means there are going to be winners and losers, just like there are winners and losers for CO2, but they're different winners and losers. So this makes the problem, if anything, harder to solve. You've introduced another dimension of complexity into the managing the planet's climate problem.
What we're watching financially is a great deal of public policy being promoted on the theory that we have climate change. And yet in that discussion, we never talk about, well, what's all this spraying and how is that involved? Engineering the weather gives you the ability to overcome or prevent droughts. It gives you the ability to inflict them if you don't go along. And the brilliance of inflicting a drought is there's no popular support against you. So this kind of invisible warfare, if it can be done, is very effective, it would seem to me, both positive and negative. Well, imagine if you can predict the weather over long periods of time, how much money you can make. You know, you can trade it. How do you manage money in that world?
Many people message me confused and bewildered as to how it is possible that such colossal programs can occur in skies above our heads, programs of climate engineering and solar radiation management that are literally decimating Earth's life support systems. And these programs are not being acknowledged by any official source, not being acknowledged by the climate science community that has indeed betrayed the human race and the entire web of life by their denial of the ongoing climate engineering elephant in our skies. And the people that message me are perplexed at how such atrocities can be ongoing for so many decades. And we have still official denial, and we have populations that are all too willing to accept that denial. I began to test for some of the primary elements named in climate engineering solar radiation management patents, starting with aluminum, barium, and strontium. My test came back from the state certified lab. To my dismay, these elements indeed were present in significant amounts, and subsequent tests showed higher and higher and higher amounts, continuing to escalate until one test was as high as 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum. This is highly toxic rain. I knew my life would never be the same because I can't look the other way. It's completely intolerable for me to live under toxic skies. And what about the trees? What about the bats, the bears, the birds, the bees? They have no voice except for us. I began to try to bring this issue to light from that moment on. Initially, few would listen, few would look at the data. But as time went on, and as more and more people woke up along the way and realized the significance of attempting to play God with the weather and engineer Earth's life support systems, more individuals from different arenas joined the effort to try to sound the alarm.
I want to tell you that we're in very great danger from the pollution that's coming down over us. And we've been led astray by the military-industrial complex. And they're responsible for the cloud's creation and weather manipulation programs.
I sacrificed 4 years of my life defending the people of my country just to come home and find there are greater threats here domestically.
There's something going on. I don't know who it is or why they're doing it. All I can testify is it's not natural and it's not normal.
Now, the aluminum content of rain should be 0.
And there's a lot of argument that aluminum is very common to be found, but aluminum is only common in a bonded form. It's not common in a free form, and we're finding high rates of free aluminum.
Because you can spread so many small little particles through the environment, it dramatically increases the surface area that's in that environment because there's so many of them. When you look up at the sun and you see a white haze, that is aluminum floating in the air right now, and it's coming from the aircraft.
Solar radiation management, SRM, to block the sun. That's the stated purpose. The consequences don't seem to be considered with these programs, but that is the stated purpose on almost all UN and global governance documents for these programs.
And in the past 5 years, I have seen the number of patients with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases tremendously increase, almost quadruple.
United States Code says you cannot experiment on the American public, and if you do, you got to report it to Congress within 30 days. Where's the proof it did that?
But is also to get the media to start reporting on this.
So all of us have a consequence that we may not be aware of, and it is important for all of us to join together and to put a stop to these programs and to hold public discussions on them for as much as possible. And I want all of you to know that it's important that we realize that this is not normal and natural, that these are programs, experimental programs that are being conducted at this time, and we all have to stand up and say no.
This tank can be used for disseminating all types of agents. Anti-crop spray from aircraft using the Aero X2A has proved very effective in field trials. For larger planes, the Air Force has perfected spray equipment. This B-17 has several spraying nozzles and carries the tank in the bomb bay.
I'm Charles Jones, Brigadier General, U.S. Air Force retired. In the years 1953 through 1962, I was stationed in Germany. Then we moved to England in 1959 while assigned to the 42nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron with dual missions of electronic countermeasures and weather reconnaissance. We also had the responsibility of reporting jet engine contrails throughout our area of responsibility in Europe, North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Eastern Atlantic. We were responsible for pinpointing the exact altitudes of all jet engine contrails noted within the flying area of responsibility in both the weather and ECM aircraft missions. We became experts on jet engine aircraft contrails and all of their characteristics. Much different from the white aircraft spray trails that consist of scientifically verifiable straying of aluminum particles and other toxic heavy metals, polymers, and chemical components. These are the long white spray trails that linger and slowly expand into light cloud cover that soon cover entire areas with an overcast, very light cloud cover. We're never going to get to the bottom of climate change until everything is laid on the table about geoengineering and the disasters that it can and is causing.
My name is Richard Rolig. I served a career of 34 years in the United States Air Force. I was able to achieve the rank of Major General. I was in the acquisition business, developing new weapon systems, and did lead one major top secret program for 3 years. During the 10 years I worked at Raytheon, the exposure to various programs was limited to what they wanted you to work on. So even though I still had the top secret clearance and certain programs I got exposed to, that was not one of them. That was compartmentalized as it should be. And unless you had a direct impact or you were personally involved in it, you would not have received that particular clearance. It goes back to around October of 17. I'm residing near an Air Force base here in Tucson, Arizona, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Aircraft exiting, doing their flight training, etc. And having lived around Air Force my whole life, my father even being a pilot, it became obvious to me that the contrails that were coming out of some of the aircraft in the local area were not normal looking. They took on a different texture, they spread differently, and so as a result, I started talking to a couple ex-pilots that are part of the organizations, asked them to look at it. My wife is a pilot. I had brought her out of the house. We looked at the contrails, and it was obvious that they were not normal. So as a result, we started doing a little research.
Yeah, we called it the elephant in the sky. I mean, everybody on the planet is looking up and seeing this kind of spraying going on. I became involved in weather modification analysis due to my background as a weather observer in the United States Air Force. And as I was looking at the jet clouds in the sky, I realized that that's certainly not normal. And so I've been watching these abnormal clouds for a long time.
Well, I started to learn about geoengineering just in a very personal way. I decided to leave Washington in 1998. I bought a small property in a farming community in Tennessee, and I still had business in Washington, and so I would drive back and forth between Tennessee and Washington, but I was also driving around the country networking with a variety of people, trying to understand what was going on in the economy. And as I was driving around, I saw this spraying, and literally you had planes crisscrossing in very unusual patterns. They'd fly back and forth, and you'd get this tapestry of crisscross spraying that would just hang in the sky for a long time. As an investment person, you're adding it up in your mind. Okay, we have 2 planes over this county flying this many hours and spraying this much stuff. This is very expensive. Who's paying for this? And I was doing a lot of research at the time on a great deal of money that was going missing from the federal government on a covert basis. On one hand, you have all this money going missing, and on the other hand, you have this fantastically expensive spraying program going on.
The ongoing global climate engineering operations must be considered a new Manhattan Project on a scale that is almost inconceivable. Governments all over the globe are either actively or passively participating in the ongoing climate engineering insanity, all for their own reasons, all in the attempt to keep business as usual until the last possible moment.
Geoengineering is occurring, it's been occurring, it is not new, and your tax dollars are funding this.
Well, my name is Kristin Megan Edwards. I am a U.S. Air Force veteran. I served 9 years on active duty working in bioenvironmental engineering. Upon my separation, which was honorably, I went and worked for the VA in the Veterans Health Administration as an industrial hygienist and an environmental specialist. So as an industrial hygienist, my job was to protect people from such things as heavy carcinogenic metals and hazardous materials. And through that, all items that came on base was approved through what is called an Air Force Form 3952. And that is a hazardous materials acquisition. So in order for a chemical to be brought on base, it had to be tied to a specific task. If people were painting aircraft, we knew where that paint was going and what it was being used for. And this was all for liability. So when you start to find constituents coming on the base that you're trying to remove from the base and engineer out through different industrial processes, that was a red flag for me and really told me to do my own research. I've often wondered with the large amount of people in all branches of the military who work in an environmental facet, why they aren't coming forward. I don't think a lot of people are connecting the dots. I wouldn't have stumbled upon why these constituents were being brought on base unless I had heard about geoengineering. So a lot of times I think people are supporting an operation but haven't really seen outside information to tie it to why this is going on. To see how much taxpayer dollars are used in military operations, whether they're peacetime or wartime, to see how much money is spent to reduce hazards, again, that affect human health and impact the environment, is a complete contradiction to geoengineering using wartime exemptions to not be cited through the EPA. This is a huge waste. This is fraud and waste from the US government. And that this is allowed to go on, to me, is unbelievable.
I think it's one of the most dangerous, diabolical things that has ever happened to us. It's the most dangerous thing short of a nuclear cataclysm. So I take it very, very seriously. and will do everything I can to try and expose the problem and encourage people to do likewise.
Well, when I was growing up, I was really a fan of Kurt Vonnegut, and Kurt wrote some remarkable works. And I later learned that most of the fodder for that work came from the work of his brother, Bernard Vonnegut, who was a scientist at GE under Irving Langmuir, the lead scientist there. That work was focused on the production of ice crystals at elevated temperature using a compound called silver iodide.
I would like to take you into the laboratory and show you a few of the experiments that led us to our outdoor experiments in converting clouds into snow. These are some which I photographed that were formed in the laboratory. This is a picture of the first cloud that we seeded back last November. Putting dry ice from a small dispenser in the bottom of the plane, under many conditions of course, full-fledged snowstorms will be produced in this way. Nature at last has permitted to do a little something about the weather.
These were something that scientists had worked on and developed through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and was likely being deployed even today. The research done by Vonnegut and Langmuir coincided with changes in our sky. As these programs, or at least this type of research, increased, the skies started to change. My first real observation of those changes and real awareness of it came, I was looking up and saw patterned skies of these trails that were being laid out by planes, then developing into confluent layers that would drift perhaps hundreds of miles, changes the weather, changes the temperature around you. Also, the light intensity and the quality of light was changing. It was funny that there was not really a lot of published literature on this material. There had been some governmental reports that I had dug into. There was some evidence that this type of research was being conducted. And in fact, there was a presentation that was given where Dane Wigington asked some questions about the materials that they were discussing and their possible role in weather modification programs.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The question is, what would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere? In particular, small particles and aluminum. In our climate model, we looked at how much additional acid rain, acid snow you would get from the sulfur coming out of the stratosphere if you did it at a rate of 5 megatons per year or 10 megatons per year of sulfate. And it turns out that amount is so much smaller than what humans put into the troposphere on an annual basis by burning fossil fuels as a byproduct. That even in pristine areas, the soil would have a buffering capacity and it wouldn't be harmful.
So the collaborators in my working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in the federal pencil and paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And the answer is no, clear-cut no. So for the numbers of particles burning in the stratosphere are so tiny compared to the loadings on human health. There are other things that worry me a lot, like the rain on these particles into the upper troposphere when they might affect high clouds. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously. But if you're just thinking about the sheer number of particles and the human health impact of small particles, the answer is, well, we haven't published it. That was the first thing we looked at with some of the leading experts who do epidemiological research on human health impacts, and it's not even close to being an issue.
So 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere will have no human health impact.
So let me be more careful here. Let's separate out the toxicological, but so the aluminum we've only begun to research and publish nothing. The question I was asking was purely about particle number density. So what we did is we said, we looked at some global estimates now. We have of aerosol global estimates that were built for epidemiological purposes of the global loading of aerosols in terms of health impacts. And we said if we added on top of that
what we're doing from the stratospheric aerosols, could it have any impact? And the answer is that that was totally irrelevant. But that was just one particle number. We haven't done anything serious on Illumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at.
Okay, so that's another 20 minutes of the dimming, Dane Wigington's documentary that came out this year. And you have it there. It's basically, there's so much information out about what's going on with the geoengineering of the weather. It's beyond rebuke, but it's just, what are we going to do about it now? We can share this stuff like we're doing, but it's up to everybody to do something, you know. You can't share it with other people. Dane uses science, you know, the scientific reasoning approach, which is, you know, which is good, but it just use your awareness. I mean, it doesn't make sense with dumping these, especially aluminum, in the environment, no matter how little David Keyes says it is or it isn't. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, we're seeing the proof of it because the fires are getting hotter, etc. So just encourage everybody to do something, whatever makes sense to you, to wake others up and to lose the agreement with those controllers that are doing this, and so we can have a better chance here on the planet. We have a few more days left. So that's my share for today. Kevin, give it to you.
Yeah, I was going to add that, I mean, the controllers and the individuals that represent them, at least those in the public eye at least, I mean, they're openly saying that they need to block out the sun because they're demonizing the sun as being a contributory factor to climate change, as they claim. And so, and these chemtrails do serve that purpose as well, in that they will block out the sun from being able to impact us, because I mean, we are protected by the ozone layer, which is designed to protect us from the more lethal radiations, but that is also being depleted by their activities. But the sunlight is required, obviously, for all plants, as it's part of their photosynthesis process. And obviously, without any plant life, then you're not going to have anything else. Because with the exchange of the gas between CO2 and oxygen between animals, humans, and plants and such. And so they're very openly demonizing the sun. And in regards to the CO2, which they're also desperately trying to install in the consciousness as that it is detrimental and needs to also be managed, and to the point where they want to bring all carbon dioxide emissions to zero. They're constantly touting how they need net carbon by, I think their projected date is around 2025 to 2030, but and everyone's openly accepting and agreeable to this, even though, of course, carbon dioxide is the gas of life. It is, you know, what we breathe out, that the plants breathe in, and then they breathe out and they produce the oxygen which we require. So if they're talking about net carbon dioxide, they must be talking about a world then where there is no exchange of these vital gases occurring, and that is more or less hinting at their agenda culminating in complete robotization of everything on the planet. And I read an article or saw a video recently, and a lot of people mentioned this, that not only are they desperately trying to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by all means possible, but I think Bill Gates has developed with his team these huge machines that can suck vast quantities of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And again, they're openly speaking about this because the vast majority have accepted the notion that carbon dioxide is dangerous and is causing climate change, and so needs to be removed. And of course, and a lot of actual alternative scientists have said that the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at the moment are only just enough to sustain life on the planet. and they're saying that if it falls anymore, then everything will start to then there won't be sufficient carbon dioxide to maintain anything of the natural environment, which then will obviously impact anything that requires the oxygen that the natural environment produces, and so it will basically be a death spiral. And I think these huge machines that Gates has developed are in operation now. And really, as we mentioned on another show, as I read out of an article from how it is that it's not really climate change that's the issue. I mean, the pollution and the continued toxicity and the destruction of the natural environment is the issue, but that all stems from all the operations that the controllers have in effect, all their chemtrail operations and all these funny other ideas they have, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to climate change, well, the climate changes all the time anyway. That doesn't actually mean anything in and of itself, because originally, when they were preparing the road for where we are now, back in the 70s and the 80s, I think they were more along the lines of calling it global warming. But that was at a point when the planet was overall quite warm at that time. But then when it started to cool, which the planet will always do because it goes through climate cycles where it's cold, where it's warm, when it became cooler, and then it didn't really back up their theories of the planet suffering a warming, as they put it, they had to change the terminology to climate change instead. But as I said on the other article, on the other show that we did, I mean, what causes climate change predominantly is based on the activity of the sun. The sun shares an electromagnetic relationship with the Earth, and when certain processes occur with the sun, which can be measurable and visually measurable through the sunspot activity, so then it affects the extent to which the planet warms or cools. Basically, the more sunspot activity there is, the warmer the planet becomes. And at the moment, they're measuring record levels of extreme inactivity in regards to sunspots, and so we're actually going into a very cool phase, and a lot of people have predicted we're actually going into a mini ice age. But again, that's nothing due to what we have caused to happen. It's just natural cycles of the planet. But this is their big agenda, their climate change propaganda, because through that they can basically reshape and model the entire human experience. Because the idea is that everybody has a carbon footprint, and so that it needs to be reduced as much as possible to their ultimate goal of it being net zero. And to do that, obviously, it will have a massive impact on people's ability to use energy, their ability to travel, their accommodation. So ultimately, they can pose the argument where they can basically place people in very sort of strict, controlled situations, like very small, almost micro apartments. They can very much limit and control how much energy they actually use, and to the point where they won't allow travel either, because again, that's part of what they propose, that the traveling is impacting the climate. I mean, all the technology we use for travel, I mean, it's so crude that it is impacting the environment detrimentally, pollution-wise, but it is not a factor in regards to climate change, which is their main propaganda. And you also see it in the schools as well, how all children now going through the school systems, they will be completely indoctrinated with this climate change information, to the point that a lot of them, when they come out the other side, then they form these huge groups of climate change activists. And you see there's a lot of it on the news at the moment, where they're protesting about that they're protesting for more people reducing their carbon emissions, which again is playing directly into the hands of the controllers, because they basically want agreement overall, but ultimately it will lead to the robotization of the entire human race, because you can't have a net zero carbon dioxide situation unless there's basically there's no exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide taking place. So people won't realize they are subconsciously agreeing basically to this overall robotization of the human race situation. And so they've effectively got people to almost consciously, in a way, agree to their climate change propaganda ideas. And of course, as we know, if you regardless of the justifications for protesting, it might look good on the surface, but of course, with it being, with that which they are protesting against being an overall created idea, where they are placing their focus with it is effectively still agreement to the idea and what it represents. And as the idea was generated from the controllers, so they are still in agreement with the controllers, even though they are on the surface and in their minds protesting against it. And so regardless of the stand you take in regards to the idea that is produced, the best course of action would be to, yes, you need to be aware of it, but you don't need to engage with it. And you certainly don't need to add emotion also to it, because it also enhances the agreement to the actual idea that it represents. And so ideally, you'd want to sort of make a new position where you're detached and indifferent to what's occurring in creation. I mean, it's still going on and you have to deal with it, but you will get embroiled in it regardless, even if you protest against it. And the controllers do know that. They understand how creation works. They understand as you focus on something, as you place your attention with it, you are in agreement with it. And if it is if it's an idea they have created, some situation which then gets everybody focused upon it, then they are effectively garnering their agreement and keeping them locked in creation. And so that's all. That's what I'll add in regards to that. So.
Yeah, well said, Kevin. Let you have time for your part there too. What you're going to share.
Okay, I was going to carry on with reading through the rest of this Brazil report. So it's a continuation from last week, and so which basically goes through all that which has been occurring in Brazil in regards to the fires, the deforestation, and the various measures that have been put forth to deal with it. Because last week it was speaking of how they actually, through what was very likely situations they had themselves instigated, as in the forest fires, etc., in response to it, they then had the justification of bringing in the military and basically locking down the entire Amazon, and also they were destroying their own resources, again with the argument, therefore, if to prevent other external countries and the individuals that represent them coming in, basically stealing their resources. So it's a bit of a silly, childish mentality in a way, but we don't want them to have them, so we will destroy them. But that means we don't get them either, and nobody has anything. And of course, the ones that suffer the most tend to be those that are controlled. And so, on the surface, it would look as though it was situations that they were dealing with in the best possible ways that they could. But these were situations they would have covertly, or they would have secretly created, and then they're producing the solutions for them, which would be agreeable by the overall majority, but in fact had been solutions proposed for situations they had in fact created. Anyway, I'll carry on with this report. So, the ministry touts a high value of fines levied during the deployment as an indicator of success. Since last May, the ministry said various agencies operating under the aegis of the operation have imposed roughly 3.3 billion reais, or about $600 million in fines. The agencies include Labama, ICM Bio, and local regulators, but not the military itself, because it has no authority to impose fines. no comparable figure for past fines is available because the agencies historically haven't collated sanctions. The Defense Ministry declined to break down its tally. Alabama, by far the largest of the environmental agencies, and the one that normally levies most of the penalties in the Amazon, imposed 1.6 billion REIS in fines in the region during the period, according to public Alabama records. The amount is less than half the total claimed by the ministry. Regulators with experience in the region question the military's figures. Because collecting is notoriously difficult, they say, the government will likely obtain only a sliver of the assessed penalties. The ministry's total also includes fines by the Federal Highway Police, better known for speeding tickets than fighting deforestation, even if patrols at times stop trucks transporting illegal lumber. They are taking credit for fines given out by anyone, said Suli Araujo, a former Alabama president. That's why it's so high. Also high, critics say, is the cost of Operation Green Brazil itself. According to the Defense Ministry, the government paid a total of about 530 million REIS, roughly $96 million for the deployment. That figure equates to over 8 times Alabama's modest 64.5 million real annual budget for fighting environmental crimes. Coming on top of steady cuts to Alabama's budget under Bolsonaro, environmental agents say the operation wasted resources. Take an environmental agent or two, add 20 soldiers. The idea seems impressive, said another Alabama agent. The thing is, these soldiers have no function whatsoever in the jungle. The Amazon, a dense forest comprising the river of the same name and its many giant tributaries, makes up about half of Brazil's territory. It forms a border of more than 10,000 kilometers with 7 other South American countries. Despite continuing development in Brazil and neighboring countries, about 80% of its original woodland remains. For Brazilian strategists concerned with national defense, the region has long been an obsession. To get a greater foothold in the wilderness, the 2-decade military dictatorship that ended in the 1980s made integration of the Amazon a priority. The regime built roads, dams, and other infrastructure there and provided cheap credit for farmers, ranchers, and others hoping to blaze a new frontier. The aim, in addition to creating a strategic presence across the Amazon to deter invasion, was to better connect the region with Brazil's more populous south. The refrain among senior officers at the time was integrate so as not to surrender. Although a settlement since has been more closely regulated, loggers, ranchers, and other would-be developers continuously push limits. Loggers are often the vanguard, felling prized hardwoods and leaving stumps and less valuable trees behind. Farmers and speculators usually follow, razing what's left of the forest, often with fire, then forging deeds or other paperwork to feign ownership. Because of the scale of the region and the obstacles to travelling within it, catching culprits is difficult. Satellite imagery in recent years has made it easier to pinpoint destruction, but authorities often arrive well after offenders have left. Even when Alabama was better funded and supported by administrations focused on deforestation, it has never been able to stop illegal destruction outright. Bolsonaro, a former army captain turned congressman, now 66 years old, won Brazil's presidency in late 2018, riding a populist wave similar to that which lifted former US President Donald Trump. He ran as a renegade. He lambasted environmentalists, feminists, and human rights activists. He praised the developmentalist bent of the military regime and dismissed the well-documented torture, disappearance, and killing of political opponents during that era. The military period wasn't a dictatorship, he told a national television network a day after his election. Upon his inauguration in January 2019, Bolsonaro stacked his cabinet with military men. A third of his ministers at present are retired officers. Recently, Bolsonaro said he will replace the chief executive of Petróleo Brasileiro S.A., the mammoth state-run oil company, with a former army general with no experience in the sector. Bolsonaro immediately dusted off old dictatorship-era development projects. He pledged to repave the BR 319, a highway meant to connect the Amazonian city of Manaus with the rest of Brazil. The highway, long a joke among truckers and skeptics of efforts to conquer the Amazon, succumbed to rain and heat after the military inaugurated it in 1976. Maynard Marquis de Santa Rosa, a retired four-star general and Bolsonaro's Secretary of Strategic Affairs, then released the video in which he proposed reviving projects that would swell the population of the northern Amazon. His proposal ultimately stalled. Santa Rosa resigned later that year. He didn't respond to a Reuters request for comment. Bolsonaro's rhetoric and push to pursue projects emboldened many nevertheless. When the annual rains eased in May 2019, loggers and arsonists took to the forest. By July, deforestation in the Amazon had soared to levels not seen in well over a decade, prompting international outrage and criticism from foreign leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron. By the time Bolsonaro mobilized troops that August, areas with a combined size equal to Denmark had burned. The president was defiant. The fire that burns most is our sovereignty, he tweeted on August the 23rd, warning foreigners to butt out of Brazil's business. That same day, he launched Operation Green Brazil. The size of the deployment has varied, depending on the needs of individual operations. Roughly 3,800 soldiers were mobilized, the Defense Ministry said last year, employing as many as 110 vehicles, 20 boats, and 12 aircraft. Bolsonaro put Morale, the vice president and former general, in charge of the operation and of a new Amazon Council to oversee national policy in the region. Staffers at Alabama and ICM Bio were indignant. Neither of the two agencies was invited to the council when it launched. The Environment Ministry, previously so influential, it once convinced Brazil's powerful central bank to block financing for people illegally clearing woodland, was now taking orders from soldiers. Throughout the operation, environment agents say they have been flabbergasted by military decisions. Last May and June, in the centre-west state of Mato Grosso, troops set up field operations near the already developed farming areas of Sinop and Juara. But the most intense clearing at the time was at least 275 kilometers northwest, two Alabama agents told Reuters. The Defense Ministry said troops initially deployed further away because state authorities had already established a strong presence near the destruction. Still, as troops redeployed and moved closer to the action throughout July, more than 300 square kilometers, nearly twice the area of Washington, D.C., had been cleared in Mato Grosso, satellite data showed. Even when troops were in position, missions moved slowly. In mid-June, a team of Alabama officials rumbled down a jungle road toward a plot near the Rio Novo, a river in the central Amazon, according to 3 agents involved with the mission. Days before, researchers at INPE, Brazil's Space Research Institute, spotted new clearings in imagery of the area. Hoping to surprise loggers in action, Alabama notified the military, the agents told Reuters. Instead of making a quick and stealthy sortie to the hotspot, however, the agents had to mobilize with 20 heavily armed soldiers in 3 5-ton Volkswagen trucks. The trip would have been possible in 2 hours with fewer people and nimbler equipment. It took twice as long. It also drew more attention along the way, the agents said. When they arrived, the agents found 10 square kilometers of destruction and a freshly abandoned logging camp. Lookouts, they believe, had tipped off the loggers. Catching someone red-handed is practically impossible with the military, one of the agents said. Chagas, of the Defense Ministry, said if soldiers slowed missions, their presence in large numbers was none the less important because of their capacity to deter violent reactions during raids. It's not good to resist or fight back, he said. During 2 weeks of patrols in the area, centered around the long-time logging hub of Novo Progresso, agents caught no offenders in the act. Government data show that more than 30 square kilometers, an area half the size of Manhattan, was cleared there in those 2 weeks. Environmental agents said the military also slowed decision-making. In other missions near Novo Progresso, the 3 agents said officers disregarded tips for possible raids offered by Alabama's imaging analysts, who have long experience pinpointing active deforestation. After daily briefings, they said military superiors would disregard the intelligence and suggest targets of their own, saying analysts at the Defense Ministry had identified them. The result, the agents said, were delays in decision and a lack of cooperation. There was nothing explained about why not this target, why not the other, one of the agents said. The government says any such operation involving many agencies and coordinated from on high is bound to leave some frustrated. Sometimes people in the field, they don't have the big picture, Chagas told Reuters. On other missions, arguments ensued over basic tactics used by Alabama to stop destruction. In northern Para, 3 agents and 3 military officers held a video call to discuss illegal gold mines carved out by interlopers on the Karuaya Indigenous Reserve. Travel to and from the mines was causing deforestation, and mercury, a deadly chemical used by miners to extract gold from sediment, was leaking into the reserve's streams. The agents, according to one who participated in the discussion, said they needed to raid the mines and destroy equipment. Such summary punishments on native lands and forest reserves are authorized under Brazilian law because the equipment is often difficult to remove and the illegality of logging and mining there is beyond question. Bolsonaro has made clear he disapproves of the tactic, claiming it deprives rural workers of equipment needed to earn a living. The military officers, according to the agent's account of their deliberation, said they were allowed to cut fuel lines or slash tires, but couldn't completely wreck equipment. They said they agreed with us, but they couldn't disobey a superior order, the agent said. The raid didn't proceed. Chagas, the admiral, said there could have been a misunderstanding. Unlike environmental agents, he explained, the military isn't authorized by law to destroy machinery. The military isn't avoiding destroying machinery, he said. The destruction is a task for the agencies. Whatever the case, Bolsonaro's opponents charge his position on the issue undermined the very rationale behind the Amazon deployment. Last year, Bolsonaro introduced a bill in Congress to allow mining and commercial farming on indigenous lands. Those areas make up almost a quarter of Brazil's Amazon. When US President Joe Biden, shortly before his election, warned of significant economic consequences for Brazil if it didn't do more to protect the rainforest, Bolsonaro, in a statement, condemned cowardly threats toward our territorial and economic integrity. Some opponents see Bolsonaro's behavior as a wink and a nod for continued destruction. The deployment is just for show, said Carlos Nobre, a leading Brazilian scientist. It has been very ineffective. He noted parallels with the deployments of soldiers untrained in street policing to combat organized crime in Rio de Janeiro in recent years. Those deployments, too, were widely perceived as failures. In August, a group of Alabama agents raided a wildcat gold mine on another indigenous reserve in Para. The raid was one of a handful the agency conducted in the region without direct military involvement. Televised footage showed agents torching excavators and other mining equipment. The following day, the Defense Ministry halted the intervention. It said further consultations would be necessary with the Munduruku, the local tribe. Alabama agents departed, leaving some of the equipment intact. Arnaldo Caba Munduruku, the tribe's chief, supported the Alabama raid. After it was aborted, the miners returned. They're back, the chief said. And that information was sourced from Reuters. Additional reporting by Anthony Bodor and Lissandra Paraguasu in Brasilia. Editing by Paulo Prada.
Well, anyway, this is the World Forest Report, and we are just ending here with the reports on what's going on in the world with the forest fires and the geoengineering of the weather and chemtrails and all that's going on with that, with the destruction of the environment, purposeful destruction of the environment. And we're just reporting the news. We're not for or against, but we suggest you take note that this is our planet, and if we destroy it, we no longer have the physical body here to experience things with. So it's just a matter of like, what are we going to do? Do something that makes sense to benefit the planet and others for the wake up that is happening. That it's a short window we have, so let's do something that makes sense and do something here that offsets what's going on. So that's why we're doing this report and just warning people and putting it out there. Your choice. Thanks, Kevin.
New